So that's why you wanted to get an MBA. But what did you write in your essays? It's not always the same. You got to craft a story sometimes. You have to get to the program of your choice. You have to do your best. Did your essays read similarly to what you just described, or was it different? I'm curious to know what you wrote in your essays.
My essays totally read different. Come on.
All right. What's going on, Macy? So good to have you here today. I'm excited to talk to you
Thanks,
about
honey.
all things MBA, HBS, and learn about your career path. I hope this can help a lot of people that are thinking about MBAs and maybe thinking about taking a similar career path as you have. So would love to dive in. But before that, let me just quickly introduce you. So today we have Macy with us today. She's the VP of Revenue and Operations at SafeBase. And Macy, actually, before I could probably try to introduce you, but there's probably no one better to introduce you than yourself. Could you tell us a little bit about your background and what you're doing at SafeBase today, and then we'll kind of take it back, if it's okay, rewind to talk about your MBA application process, your time at HBS, and everything in between then and SafeBase. So I'll hand it over to you if that's okay.
Sounds great. Hey, Mike, it's really good to see you again. It's been far too long since we've had a real, in real life coffee chat. So glad to be doing this remote at least. So yeah, hi everyone. I'm Macy Mody. As Mike mentioned, VP of Revenue and Operations at SafeBase essentially means I lead all of the go-to-market teams as well as all of the general company operations teams. And SafeBase is a startup, a Series A startup. We have 60 people. And we have been around about 3.5 years. So we've grown quite quick. I joined actually as employee 6, and now we are 60, as I mentioned. So lots of fun growth that happy to talk about during this chat, Mike. What do? We are the customer-facing trust center to automate B2B security reviews. So we work with companies like OpenAI, LinkedIn, Instacart, Datadog, et cetera, and we help them automate the security review process. So if you've ever had to onboard a new vendor, there's usually this annoying questionnaire that comes in, and we believe those should go away. So that's what we're all about at SafeBase. And yeah, I'm super excited to chat through more.
I'm going to ask you a lot of questions about what it's like to be employee 6 at a company that's kind of like on this rocket ship trajectory, and maybe how that relates to your time at HBS. So you're an HBS alumnus from the class of 2020. Is that right?
Correct.
2020. Okay. So let's rewind a bit, but let's talk about what you were doing before, before HBS, between maybe college and grad school. And I'd love to kind of also learn like why or how you even considered getting an MBA in the first place.
I'm one of those people that kind of knew I wanted to go back for grad school because I loved college, had a great experience, but I always kind of felt during it that if I actually had real world experience that I could apply these learnings to, I'd be able to understand so much more. So for me, that was like the main driver. So I actually took my GMAT when I was in college still, which was great. Highly recommend if anyone from college is watching this, because once you're out of that study groove, it's really hard to get back in it, to actually take a standardized test. But before I actually went back to school, I was at Amex. So I was there for a few years. I was on the finance teams, working on membership rewards, so how folks can spend and earn their points. And then I actually transitioned over to the digital team. So at the time, Amex kind of had all of the digital assets housed under one roof. And I was helping with investment optimization there. After that, I actually went and helped spin out the labs team. So the more innovative technology that Amex was working on. So at the time, that was AI chat, that was blockchain, all the buzzwords in those days. And that's kind of actually what really drove me to go back to school at the time I did, because I got to experience large corporate. And then on the labs team, I actually got to experience like kind of I'll call it like an incubator in a bigger company, and experience that super fast-paced nature of work. And that's what I loved. So I wanted to make that pivot over to kind of more the startup land. And I thought, what better way to do that than take a pause, go get my MBA, learn a bit, make some new friends, get a better network, and then continue my career.
Yeah. No, super cool. So you always had the idea of an MBA in the back of your mind, it seemed like, even in college. And then you got this like this experience where large company, but also startups and some like innovative technologies. And you're like, ooh, I want to like explore that a little bit more. Is that right?
Exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. It was more exploring that, but really loving that fast-paced nature, right? Like
Mm,
I like being able to make decisions quick and to like see the impact of the stuff I'm working on. So for me, the large corporation wasn't necessarily the right fit because it's
yeah.
just a bit slower paced
Yeah.
naturally.
That's awesome that you learned that like so early in your career. You're like, okay, I had the big company experience, but I'm actually more aligned with this faster pace. So that's why you wanted to get an MBA. But what did you write in your essays? It's not always the same. You got to craft a story sometimes. You have to get into to the program of your choice. You have to do your best. Did your essays read similarly to what you just described, or was it different? I'm curious to know what you wrote in your essays.
My essays totally read different. Come on. I think most people's do, right? You don't really know. Like this is from reflection, okay? Like looking back why I really think I made the decisions I did. I don't think in the moment I knew it, right? So
Hmm.
in my essays I wrote about international expansion and working at companies like mid-sized companies that were working to expand internationally. And for me, I was working at the rewards team at Amex. It was all the international rewards points. So I wasn't doing
Uh,
US. So that's what was influencing it. But deep down, I knew I wanted to go into startup. But I think it's definitely more widely accepted now that that's like a good career path. But I think, 7 years ago when I was applying, I was also hesitant to say I want to go into startup because I didn't know if that was like a good thing to do for an MBA app. And I do think now it is. It's about being uniquely yourself because that's the best way you're going to be able to tell your story. My main essay for HBS was actually about like my family and how I've like transition points throughout my life and my family's story. So it's a little bit different, but that was my HBS one. And then not everyone has that kind of generic prompt. So
that's awesome. What the application process, at least mine, was was like very rewarding, but also painful at the same time. I had never done that type of reflection, to be honest. I was like, focus on in school and college, I was focused on classes, focused on getting a job. Then I got the job, and then I was just like working all the time. So I never really actually took a beat to think about like my family or who I am. But that process actually gave me that opportunity, kind of forced me to do it. And that was challenging because I'd never done it before. I'm curious to know more about your experience. Like, how did it feel, or like any tips you might have for someone who's thinking about applying to schools this year or maybe in the future?
yeah, really good point. First of all, my college was definitely focused on classes too, but like let's also think about the fun. Like football Saturdays, I went to Michigan. Definitely
Yeah.
look forward to that.
Oh.
And so some of the good stuff too. It wasn't all
Mm.
all the class and the studying and the job. So, but yes, my application journey also was probably one of the earlier times like I reflected, and it was really hard, honestly. Like I had to write my essays many times, and I mentioned it was more about my family, and I also had to like run it by people to make sure I was telling us the story that in a compelling way. Like I had never had to sell myself the way I felt I needed to for an MBA.
Hmm.
For me, what I did that worked really well depends where you're applying, of course, but like if you're applying to either HBS or GSB, they have this like generic essay. And if you start there, that can then help inform the others, right? Because it's like this general prompt that you're able to take and then parse into smaller breakouts for schools like other schools I applied to were like UCLA and Texas and things like that. So those weren't like you didn't need the huge hefty essay. So being able to have this like long form thing already written about my short term goals, my long term goals, my story, and take bits and pieces was super helpful. So highly recommend starting with like the broadest topic of whatever it is that year for whatever school and just being yourself because I think what I didn't like everyone always said it. I don't know if you feel this way, Mike, but everyone always told me that I talked to like you're going to go into that HBS interview and that person is going to know you like so well and you're going to be in shock and it's going to be weird. And I was like, what does that even mean, right? But like that person had read my application through and through, I'm pretty sure multiple times. And like, again, story about my family, asked in-depth questions about how my family was doing, right? Like things like that, that it's, if I hadn't been true to who I was, it would have come out in the interview process anyways. And it wouldn't have netted in a net positive for me. So my
Yeah.
biggest piece of advice is to make sure you're actually telling something real.
Yeah, that's great advice. I think that's probably the best advice you could give anyone. Yeah, my interview process was the same. You kind of get the heads up about the interview that they tell you they're going to review your resume like thoroughly and that sort of thing, and you kind of take them for the word. But when you're there, you're like, oh, you actually read like every single word and like punctuation and the letters of recommendation. You can almost like start piecing together like, oh, that was from that recommender that they said something about that experience that we had together. And you're like, oh, they do know this thing inside out.
So true. They literally were saying like quotes from my recommenders during the interview, and they
Yeah.
paired me with someone from like the financial services industry, right? So that they could ask me pointed questions about my time at Amex
Hmm.
that really knew what I was talking about.
Yeah.
It was
Yeah.
super special,
Yeah, they
unique.
asked a lot of questions like relevant to the industry you're coming from. That was same for me. Yeah, that was good. And yeah, they ask you questions too. I think they really want to know your personality and like who you are. And yeah, they'll
Yeah,
probably like compare that to like how you came off in your essays. See how like
exactly.
how well you might know yourself. That's probably something they're looking for too. Now that I'm reflecting on it.
Or I don't know how well you might know yourself, or like how true you are to who you are. Because
Hmm.
like candidly, I think HBS has a reputation of like, not, it doesn't have the best reputation of its people more broadly,
Uh-huh.
of, just over the years. But
Yeah.
really every person I interacted with at HBS is like a good human that I
Yeah.
would be excited to call a friend.
Hmm.
And I think that's because they're getting that authentic feeling during the interview process and weeding out folks that are just there to be there.
Yep. That rings true for me too. Okay. Switching gears here a little bit to your HBS experience, like 2 years at HBS. I'm curious to know, like, did you go into your MBA program like thinking like, oh, these are the things I'm going to do, or these are the things I'm not going to do. I'm going to focus on these things more than other things. Did you have a plan going in?
No.
Okay.
I think the best advice I got before starting was like, there's three areas you're going to want to be focused on all the time. It's school and class, it's recruiting, and it's networking, right?
Mm.
And take networking as you will. Like, it's a
Hanging
lot
out with
about just
friends.
making friends. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. But like, everyone kept saying like, you think you have time for all of those, you don't, right? You have time for 2 out of 3, and you have to pick what those 2 out of 3 are, and you have to be really prescriptive about it. And it might flip flop, right? There might be sometimes that are heavier on the recruiting front and sometimes that are heavier on other things,
Hmm.
but at least make sure you know what your most important thing is that you're trying to focus on.
Yeah.
So that's how I planned, as in I at least had that top of mind so that as I went there, I could think through, hey, what am I trying to prioritize? Because the reality is you get to campus, and this is true of whatever school you're at. My friends that went to other schools had the exact same experience, right? It's you get there and there's like 10 competing things you can do at one time, right?
Mm.
There's whatever club, there's like your friends are meeting up for dinner, your section's having a section event, there's this crazy cool speaker from whatever country that like flew in to talk, in Klarman, the big auditorium. And like you actually have to be really conscious about what you pick and why, because there's not time to do it all. So like just looking back, I do think I had been a little bit more intentional, because people said that and I didn't quite believe them. Like I kept it top of mind, but I was like, there's time for it all. There's not.
Yeah.
Um, I definitely lean more heavily on the networking side as like number one, and then flip flop between the recruiting and school
Yeah,
focus.
when recruiting came up. No, just naming all the just as you're depicting that experience where there's like so many things to pick from. They're all amazing things to pick from. You want to go see the CEO speak, you want to go hang out with a couple of friends and learn about them a little bit more, do something fun and go to this dinner. It also it's bringing back how stressful that was in the moment. It's like, but it's such great things that I can laugh about it now. That it was
Yeah.
stressful at all, but it can be.
No, it's crazy. Like I remember I would call my dad like walking in between class or whatever it was. And I lived on campus, right? Most people at HBS live on campus. That's one thing that's unique from other schools.
Hmm.
And I would be like, talking to my dad for the 3 minutes I had. And he's like, "Oh, what do you have going on today?" I'm like, "Well, I left my apartment at 7:30 this morning and I'll be back there at 11:30 tonight." Right? And it's like, how is that possible? How did I run on that much energy for that amount of time?
Yeah.
But looking back, it was like the greatest 2 years. So I guess adrenaline.
Yeah.
But it just goes to show how much there is to do.
Totally. There's a ton to do. And so you hit on one of the things I want to dive deeper on with you is recruiting. So curious to know what your recruiting experience was like. Were you recruiting for startups? Were you meeting other companies, like other larger companies too, just to explore? What was that like for you?
I didn't do the traditional, like I didn't look at big tech. I didn't look at consulting. I really was focused on uh, growth, growth stage startups. And then also funnily enough, like real estate development. I don't know. I had an interest at that point in time and then slowly realized the stuff I didn't like about the big org would more than apply to a real estate developer because it takes, 10 years to see any output of a project you're working on. So knocked that one off my list. So moved on and really just focused on like growth stage startup from early all the way through like series D, E. So that's where the majority of my time was spent when I was doing recruiting, which meant I was focused on it a lot later than a lot of my classmates, right? Like
Mm.
anyone doing consulting or big tech is focused on it before. And then the startup jobs come out way later. So it's just like a networking game until you get there. And that's tiring. Like, I'll be honest, like just talking to someone to network is like an exhausting thing. So
Mhm.
making sure, you're kind of balancing with what's actually going to be productive and fruitful and not just networking to network. I think that's very important, especially if you're going to go into startup because you're playing a long game, right? Like consulting gets their offer and they're done. Startup, if you start doing all your recruiting when consulting is and like start networking, you still got like 6 or 8 months to go. And it's like that
Interesting.
can be an exhausting process.
Yeah, so it's like you don't want to start too early, but it can start too soon. But it can be hard when you're seeing like I was doing the consulting thing, so you're seeing a bunch of your friends just like signing their contracts,
Totally.
and so you have to be patient and know like there's a different process. Yeah, so for startups, growth stage companies, you kind of alluded to this, but it sounds like some of them came through like the career center and came to campus. But I imagine there's a bunch that also didn't go to campus. Did you recruit? Did you do your own what we call like network search? Do your own
Yeah.
outreach and that sort of thing as well?
Yeah, it was mainly the bigger companies that came to campus. So my search was definitely just networked. I was reaching out to different folks I knew and just seeing who they could connect me with. My now husband was not my husband at the time, was working in Boston, so I wanted to stay in Boston if possible. So it was a little easier for me because I could actually go meet people in person. Whereas
Oh,
if you're looking
awesome.
for San
Yeah.
Francisco, it's all on the phone. Now that's more normal, right? This was pre-COVID, so no one, that's totally fine. Yeah, it was definitely a networked search, and then one thing that we did was I think it was called West Trek. The tech club like took everyone to San Francisco for a few days to visit a bunch of offices and then like meet the CEOs, whatever, meet different people on the team. I think that was also kind of what ended up pushing me towards the smaller end of the scale versus like going for that Series DE, whatever, larger startup, because I felt I could learn a lot more in a short amount of time, which was a 3 month internship, right? I didn't want to just have like one project I was tasked with for three
Hmm.
months. That didn't excite me at that time. So being able to go to a smaller place where I could have my hands like getting dirty in the pot in many areas, that's what I wanted to do. So then it helped me narrow down my search for Boston companies.
Very cool. Very cool. And so for the people that are out there that maybe haven't done this type of like outreach and like recruiting on their own, what does it look like? So like when you say like you're reaching out to people, how are you doing that? Like what are you saying? And like are people open to speaking with you? Like some random person?
You know, being a student has its perks. Being able to say you're a student looking to talk and explore and learn from them, people are very open to talking. Now, like, are people as open? I don't know. But if I was just trying to network right now, it's not the same, right? But if you're
Yeah.
a student reaching out to alum, like, no one, unless they don't see the message, everyone's going to say yes. And that's what's special. And that's what allows you to accelerate that exploration while you're in school. And that's why so many people go for that career switch, right? Because it's a time where you can actually truly explore because everyone's open to talking to you. And so many MBA programs have this extensive alumni network you can always reach out to. It's not just HBS, right? Like
Yeah.
the alumni networks at all the schools I mentioned earlier, and Haas and Wharton and all those places, they're all from all my friends that have gone, like, so willing and open to talking to any student.
Yeah. And I'm curious to know, like, what kind of roles were you looking at at this segment of companies? Like, essentially, for like, what's a good fit for an MBA type, right? That has like the business
Yeah.
background. I know you have a little bit of finance background. Like, what types of roles are available to MBAs with similar backgrounds at tech startups?
You usually have to define the role. So I was basically looking for the broadest role I could find so that I could go, well, okay, I wasn't looking for that, but that's what I ended up focusing on because I felt that I could go in and learn and pick the areas that I really wanted to hone in on. So for me, that netted out in like a strategy and operations title, which is pretty common for MBAs going into startups. Consulting background can apply, lots of different backgrounds can apply. And you usually can end up focusing on things or you're good at that can be quick wins, and then taking on more stretch projects too. So that would be what if I were going to do it again, I would look for that like strategy and ops title, which
Mhm.
is what I ended up with. I ended up with a MBA intern ops and strategy at the time Series A company.
Okay. Yeah.
So the company I ended up joining for the summer at the time was 20 people, which was an amazing experience because I got to work super closely with, my boss, who was an HBS alum. So
Uh,
that was a great connection. And then also just the whole C suite, right? I was working very closely with the CEO and CRO and CTO on all the projects I was doing. So that was like a blessing in disguise because I didn't really know what the title should be at the time. Looking
mhm.
back, that's what I would look for.
Yeah. Got it. And so that was HQO, right? That company?
Yeah.
HQO. And then now you're at SafeBase. HQO, you joined a couple dozen people, Series A company.
Mhm.
SafeBase, you joined as employee 6, I think you said, and now you're 60. I'm curious to know, like, looking back at your MBA and what you learned and the skills you gained from that experience, what's like the most applicable to like that early stage applicable skill or like experience you had at HBS that applied
Yeah.
to those early stage companies when you joined and it was early?
Yeah. Yeah. So I was like the sixth person at SafeBase, right? So not like with the founders and all. So super
Yeah.
early, first business hire. First non-technical hire, I think, is the easier way to think about it. And I think the biggest thing is constantly being curious and wanting to learn. Like, going into a startup, you have to be comfortable not knowing everything and being able to learn on the fly and adapt. And like, you can make mistakes, like, that is fine, but just don't make them multiple times, right? Like, make a mistake, learn from it, and don't make it again. And that was always my philosophy. Like, you can't be too hard on yourself because we're all going to mess up as you're building and growing a company, but make that mistake and learn from it. So that mentality is something I would definitely say is important. Curiosity, and then just the willingness to roll up your sleeves. Like, you join an early stage startup, you can't have an ego, right? Like, you just got to be willing to do whatever it is. And it's not always going to be a sexy task, right? It's going to be like something you don't want to do.
Yeah.
And
Something that
that
frankly
happens.
probably might seem below someone who just got their MBA or something, right?
Exactly. And like, you have to have the attitude that nothing's below you.
Yeah.
And that's how you grow and grow up in the career too, right? Is like, you have to prove that you're willing to do what it takes and learn as you go and hone those skills over time so you can continue to move up the ladder if that's your goal, right?
Yep.
So yeah, I would say like the biggest thing for me is the mentality of being willing to do anything and just learn from it. Knowing failure is okay, but being able to pick yourself up, move on, and not make the mistake again.
Yeah, yeah. And I asked that question just about like, the skills and qualities you need as an early employee, early team member on that like kind of founding team, first business hire. I think it's big different, something different where you're creating something brand new, right? For the most part. But I also think like my guess is that you're going to be able to tap into a lot of your HBS learnings and skills and curriculum, just the program, as you're growing this organization. 60 people today, it's going to be growing. And that MBA, or especially the HBS MBA, is a general management program. So they're grooming us, training us to think about growing large companies. A lot of it's focused around the enterprise. So I imagine you're going to get a lot of value out of that experience as you grow with SafeBase.
Yeah, look, I think for me, when I look back on undergrad versus MBA, undergrad, I'm sure in the moment I felt like I learned a lot. But like if I look now looking back, like I don't remember anything I learned in my undergrad accounting
Yeah.
class. Okay. Like I don't, or my undergrad business stats class, right? Like I don't remember that stuff because of how it's taught. I've never had experience. I don't know where it's going to apply. And I'm just being lectured, right? And I think that's the biggest difference for an MBA, right? Whenever I'm in a tough situation, I can usually now think back to an anecdote that someone said in class of something they faced because it's all discussion based, right? It's all like relating back to experiences you've had. And I can like think through that. If I wanted to, I could reach out to them, right? If I wanted to talk through it with someone. But I just have something to relate to as I'm going. And I think that's where the big difference in the learning comes from is it sticks a lot better. A lot of that comes from the case method, but a lot of that comes from just also as you're learning, now having something to relate it to that is real versus hypothetical because
Yeah,
it doesn't stick in your brain the same.
totally. Totally. All right, we're running out of time here, so I got two final questions for
Good.
you. This question comes from the people that I speak to, that are thinking about getting an MBA. They're not sure; they haven't made their decision if they're going to apply or not. But what it boils down to always is it worth it? And so my question for you is, what's the ROI been for you on getting your MBA?
Good question. I can't give an actual number, but what I can tell you is both my jobs post MBA came from connections with MBA, right? So if I look at the ROI from like a pure, what are my job prospects? I already mentioned at HQO, I got that through an alum. He was amazing. He's a great mentor, someone I learned so much from. And then my current role, actually, the two co-founders found it out of our class. So they went through Y Combinator right after HBS. While I was still at HQO, and I reached out because it was a section mate, and I wanted him to connect me to YC companies because he had just gone through YC. And it ended up, I won't go through the whole story, but that I ended up at SafeBase, right?
Amazing.
And now I'm working with two of my classmates. So, well, actually more. We have more of our classmates on board now. But when I started, it was just the CEO and CTO that were classmates of mine. So all that to say, from like a job prospect perspective, I wouldn't be in the position I am had I not gone. And then a lot of my closest friends now are HBS. And it's awesome because one, they're all very impressive individuals, right? Like they're amazing people to have in my circle. But two, like I don't think I really went to business school thinking I'd leave with like a big addition to my circle of closest people in my life, and they are. So I think that was an unexpected benefit that significantly contributes to the ROI, even though it's not measurable from a
Yeah,
numbers perspective.
it's immeasurable. It's immeasurable.
Yes, yes, it's priceless.
Priceless. No, totally. I think that's been very consistent across every one of these conversations I've had. It's the close friends thing. It's just hard to describe, I think, in words, but it's a feeling too.
Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, I don't know why it's so special. Like, and it again, it's not just an HBS thing. It's all schools have
Hmm.
this effect. It's I guess we're all at similar points in life for the
Yeah,
most part. I mean, some folks are married, not have kids, don't, whatever. But like, we're all exploring and kind of going through this new journey together, and it brings you closer.
yeah. Cool. Thanks, Macy. One last question is just open ended.
Yeah.
Like, what advice, thinking about the same person who's, early in their career, thinking about maybe getting an MBA, maybe just thinking about going and working at startups or growth companies. Is there any advice that you'd like to kind of leave them with?
I think be open minded. Don't be scared of failure, right? I kind of just harped on that. I went on a soapbox, so I won't go further. But don't be afraid to fail. It's okay to fail, especially in the startup world and especially in MBA admissions. I kind of like to think it's like a little bit luck of the draw. Did the person who pick up your application pick it up on a morning they were in a good mood or not? Because there's so many.
Hmm.
It's not all luck, but a lot of it. So I think just being really open minded to new experiences is something that whatever it is, if it's startup, if it's MBA, if it's just life, is going to allow you to flourish and excel. And remembering that every experience can teach you something. So no matter how it ends, take a learning from it and make sure you become better because of it. And that's something I definitely did not do pre MBA that MBA taught me, right? The beauty of like reflecting and
Hmm.
reflection and making sure you're realizing the impact every experience has on what you're trying to do.
Yeah. Amazing advice. Thank you so much, Macy. I'm sure this conversation is going to help a lot of people. So I appreciate you making the time.
Awesome. No, it's super fun, Mike. Thanks for inviting me.
Yeah.